All right, so today I am finally finishing episode 2 of Stylistic Coaching Wide Threat Bubbles versus Top Heavy. Already did the Wide Threat Bubble half of this video, which you can go watch. This will be more focused on the top heavy teams this time. So last time we talked about, again, this is in the last video, typical pros and cons of these teams. So just to look at back at the top heavy points very quickly. You get more top tiers, you get stronger synergies, um, but you give up, you're more predictable in prep and you have less options when a matchup is unfavorable. So we're going to be thinking about how do you maximize the strengths while minimizing those weaknesses. All right, so now if we jump ahead, we're going to be looking at another great draft, another suboptimal draft, and more takeaways about, you know, how to draft top heavy. So first, this is the suboptimal draft. This is Sukaba Season 5 in the BDSP League. As you can see, very top heavy. First three picks, Togekiss, Gengar, Garchomp, was over half of the 110 points. That's 56 out of 110, which is obviously, extreme top heavy. Um, and we're not going to go too much into this team right now, but as you can see, you see a huge electric weakness, huge ice weakness, rock, flying, not great, psychic, also not great. So um, you're starting to see probably the issues of this team already in terms of like the typing synergy. But let's take a look at our better team. Sly last season, season 6. Um, Urshifu, Tornadus, Heatran, Clefairy, Gastrodon, Serena, Gothita, Licky was mainly the team. I think the other three did not come. So when you look at these two teams, obviously the point values tell you one story um, in terms of how top heavy these teams are. But also you see on both teams the three one pointers, or okay, on this team the three one pointers, and on this team the one three pointer and the two one pointers, and none of these were ever coming, except for Chargebug may have had an opportunity to come but didn't. But one of these telltale signs is that you have a lot of Pokemon that really are not coming, and if they're coming, maybe they'll come once. Um, you know, in Chargebug's case. All right, so we're gonna keep looking at these teams, but what do we see as strengths of Sly's team, and weaknesses of Sukaba's team? So first we see on Sly's team that the biggest threats definitely cover each other. So the two biggest threats in this team are Urshifu and Heatran. Urshifu's Achilles heel obviously being fairy types, and Heatran being the best counter to fairy types in the game because it's fire and steel. So that is quite nice. Heatran also resists that flying weakness for Urshifu, and the only thing they share is a fighting weakness. Um, but look at the support pieces. Tornadus resists fighting, Clefairy resists fighting and has Follow Me, and Gothita resists fighting. It actually came a lot more than maybe you would assume. So, you know, type synergy is pretty strong here. If you look at Heatran now, so I was looking at Urshifu and how those weaknesses are covered, but if you look more at Heatran, you have Tornadus as a ground immune, you have Zarina as a ground resist, you have Gastrodon as a water type to attack grounds, and also um, with Storm Drain to suck away water moves from Heatran, and then all the fighting resists that I mentioned before. Um, so you cover for the Heatran well, and then the Gastrodon. I mean, if you look at the grass column, you have no other weaknesses, and you have, I mean, Heatran again, best possible grass grass check or grass counter. So you have that. You have Tornadus. You have Zarina. Um, so yeah, you're doing pretty well into grass types. Um, so you know, I think for the most part, this typing synergy is quite strong. So Slide does have that going in his favor. And then if we look at Tsukaba's team, the major thing that sticks out to me is 40 points spent on Togekiss and Garchomp, which are both weak to ice, very weak to ice. You have a 4x and a 2x, and you're kind of lacking in immunities on the way down the roster. I also see three flying types that share, I think they're all weak to electric, rock, ice. Oh, no. Moltres is not weak to ice. Um, but I think otherwise they're weak to electric, rock, ice, and you have two 4x rock weaknesses. So the typings aren't working together perfectly. Um, you have Machamp and Garchomp as rock resist, but still the double up on the 4x weakness and the three flying types even makes your rock matchup not ideal. And then ice is the most striking one to me, just because you spent 40 points on these Pokemon. Um, and you have Milotic to sort of deal with that, but it's not going to deal with that by itself, of course. So I think maybe you'd be better off with a fire type that actually resists ice on this team. Although I know they were rare in this BDSP format, so you know, tougher, tougher done than said. Uh, but the typing definitely leaves something to be desired on this team. Is my point. Um, let's go back to our conclusions page. So strive for bests. What I mean by this is you want, especially I think, obviously you want strong attackers, but I think especially in support you want bests. I think speed control is the best example of this. Tornadus. Um, you know, very few teams are going to have better fast mode speed control than you, which is important because you're aiming, if your opponent can take control of the game. So any of these game controlling things, fake out, which is why Zarina is good, switches, which is why Gothita is good on this team. I mean, even Clefairy has game control in Follow Me and Friend Guard. So Sly does a really good job on this team of getting game control, also redirection with Gastrodon. Um, and I think game control is really important for these teams because since your opponent knows what's coming, you can't surrender control of the game as easily as maybe a wide threat bubble team could, because you just don't have the flexibility to play. You don't have the same flexibility to play around what your opponent wants to do to you. So, like a good example of this is Heatran. If you want to win with Heatran on this team, you need to probably knock something out before it uses a ground move at you. Obviously, you can run Shuka or Balloon, but you know, just um, imagine a scenario where you need to be in control of the game with Clefairy or Tornadus or Gothita trapping the right thing in, to not get hit by a ground move or to kill something before it can hit you with the ground move. Um, and Slide doesn't really have a ton of ways to play around that, other than just establishing control of the game. Whereas if you had a wider team, like I think Jordan's Heatran team with also had Gastrodon. I believe that was a wider team. Um, but if you have more threats on your team that you can win with, then controlling the game for your Heatran becomes less important because you can just win with one of your other 8 um, Pokemon or one of your other 9 Pokemon. But on Sly's team, he has to win with Heatran or one of his 7 other Pokemon, and I see Urshifu can win a game. Torn probably struggles out of max to win a game. Clef doesn't win a game. Gastrodon might win a game, but it's difficult. Zarina could win a game. Gothita certainly won't, and Licky Licky could. So your options are kind of limited, especially because the ones that can win a game, aside from Urshifu, are not, they're not super run away with the game type ones, except for maybe Gastrodon, in my opinion. So, you're really putting a lot more pressure on your Heatran to perform. So you need to control the game more so that it can perform. So this is my very long way of saying you need really good game control on these top heavy teams. So you need to invest a lot in um, your support and your game control, which I think Sly did very well on this team. I think that might honestly be the best aspect of this team. You have Prankster Tailwind, best follow me in the game. You do have a shadow tagger, although it's not like the best shadow tagger, but it's still quite good. And you have fake out denial in Zarina. So a lot of game control. Whereas if you look at Sukaba, when I think of game control, I'm thinking maybe Tailwind, but that's only Butterfree, um, who's not the best Tailwinder. And also, this is why the lack of type synergy comes to hurt Sukaba, because it's harder to bring Butterfree if you are always bringing Togekiss and Garchomp, because it's just another thing to hit with ice moves. So it's really not helping this team that much in terms of controlling the game. Togekiss is follow me, but if that's your only game control, you're kind of unhappy because then you can't attack with Togekiss. And you paid 20 points so that you could attack and do support stuff with Togekiss. So you don't want to be locked into follow me and game control for your Togekiss. Gengar, usually gets Icy Wind, which is decent game control, but I noticed at least the doc says it doesn't get Icy Wind in BDSP, which obviously means that it controls the game a lot less. And even when it does get Icy Wind, susceptible to sucker punches and I mean 110 is fast, but there are faster speed controls. Um, Garchomp, not really a game controller, kind of pure sweeper. Machamp, mostly a sweeper. Milotic has a little game control with competitive. Um, so there is that game control there. Moltres can control the game a little, can slow stuff down, can burn stuff, uh, do damage mitigation, but again, tough to bring with Togekiss. And, if Milotic's coming, then you have another electric weakness with Togekiss. Um, if you're bringing Butterfree, then you have another rock weakness. So Moltres in a kind of tricky spot as well. Um, so again, uh, even if it can control the game a little, it's not doing the best job at that. Oh, and Butterfree, I forgot, Rage Powder is just worse than Togekiss, which I'll get to in a moment. But that probably dissuades you from actually clicking it. Um, and you want on top heavy teams, mid and low tiers with specific use cases. So that's um, basically what I mean by that is the mid and low tiers that you do have, they're probably going to be pretty weak um, in a from a like week to week standpoint or viewpoint, but they should have a very specific intent and very specific cases that you want to use them. So if we look at the like usable mid tiers on this team, mid to low tiers, it's really just Gothita, Licky Licky, Charge Bug. So Gothita obviously offers you Shadow Tag and Fake Out, which are obviously not on the top of the team. So Gothita obviously has places where you want to use it, and spoiler alert, it was like might have been Sly's most used. I know that sounds wrong. It was amongst Sly's most used, and it was used like far more than Clefairy. Um, I don't know if how I don't think that's too much of a commentary on the team. It's probably more a commentary on Sly's style and preferences, because he was using Shadow Tag much more than he was using Follow Me. But either regardless, Gothita definitely has specific use cases on any team as a low tier. Licky Licky, just a cloud. Well, so Cloud9 is big against some teams, especially Braffs. And then it's also just pretty strong own tempo stuff. I believe Tornadus gets swagger, but somebody should probably fact check me on that. So, you know, I think it also gets belly drum, explosion stuff. So it has obvious use cases as just a bulky normal type and a, you know, separate sweeping option. And then Charge-a-Bug did not come, but battery is obviously a specific use case. Um, I think it's tough to manage with Heatran because Heatran wants speed control or redirection so badly that it's a lot of opportunity cost to bring a charge bug just for battery, but battery is definitely a option that the rest of the team doesn't provide. And this is sort of also what Sly mentioned to me is that your low tiers are coming at significant opportunity cost on a top heavy team. So you want them to have, their strong matchup should be very strong, and then it doesn't particularly matter as much if they're not bringable week to week. Um, I think is the idea, just because they're not intended to come that often, which is why um, on a wider team you might want a more bringable low tier, but on a top heavy team you're aiming more for something that just adds some new layer to your team, whether that's a shadow tag or a battery, um, or just like a bulky normal type for Licky Licky. And then if we look at the bottom two, I don't know what Mariani was supposed to do, to be completely honest. But Ghastly actually does have a very niche use case. I only know this because I've used Haunter for the same uh, use case, although Haunter's a lot better. Ghastly, I think, just pairs well with Heatran and can ally switch because it is ground immune and fighting immune. Um, so it does have that little niche use on this team. So, just the thing to focus on low tiers on these top heavy teams is that you want to have a specific use in mind. Because if you just get one of these like kind of solid but pretty bad low tiers, it's never going to come. Because the opportunity cost of taking out an Urshifu or a Heatran or a Gastrodon is so high. So if we look at Sukaba's team, this is, I think, maybe even more so than the typing stuff, is like the greatest pitfall of this team. Because if you look at I'd consider the mid tiers like Machamp, Moltres, Ditto, Butterfree. Um, Machamp, it adds a little bit more of a punch, but I don't know when it's ever going to be doing much more than a Garchomp, because like fighting types are nice because they hit steals, but Garchomp already has ground stab. Um, it hits dark types, but Togekiss hits dark types. So it's in a little bit of a weird spot, although it is good. Um, but it's probably never going to take the spot of a Togekiss or Garchomp. It's just going to be more an alternate sweeper option, I would imagine. Um, my low tick is a little bit more high tier, but Moltres, that's a mid tier. You know, it doesn't add. I mean, it adds burn stuff and bulky stuff, but it does so while also adding to common weaknesses. So maybe that's not something you want to bring too often. And it, burns and doing a little bit of fire damage is not like a specific use. It's more of just like a general usefulness that it's like kind of fine at. Ditto doesn't, I mean, like, Ditto is very weird. If used correctly, it does have like specific use cases, but it's also very, you know, there's nothing in mind when you draft Ditto of this is when I'm going to use the Ditto or this is what I'm going to use it for. So I don't love it on this type of team that really wants its mid tiers to have specific, um, you know, good matchups when the top tiers maybe are not as good. So, a steel type for all of the ice types coming, or, um, you know, well, actually, a steel type for the ice and the rock, because I was going to say rock type. So, and then lastly, Butterfree. I mean, this is I think the best example in the whole team of lack of specific use case. Yes, it adds Tailwind, but Butterfree's big thing is Rage Powder, and Togekiss is just it's a better redirector. Um, there's really no avoiding that. Also, Butterfree is adding to Ice weakness. It's adding to Rock weakness. So it's really not positioned to come often, and when it does come, it's just gonna die to the coverage that's there for Togekiss and Garchomp. So the Butterfree is like, I think, I don't want to be too harsh on Sukaba. I mean, I I think he can take it, so I'll say it. I think Butterfree is like simply kind of just a waste of points on this team. And to be fair to Sukaba, I don't think he would draft this team again. And also the idea of just I'm going to draft the two best Pokemon in the format, is valid. And I mean, he did win 3 games as a first season coach, so I think there is a little more merit to this team uh, than I am letting on. I do want to respect that just for a moment, because I did mention bests, and Togekiss and Garchomp really are bests in this format. Garchomp was like the best sweeper. Togekiss maybe the best Pokemon. I mean, it was redirection. It's best redirection. Well, maybe not best redirection. It's redirection. It's one of the best damage dealers. It's the best fairy type. So it was really, really ideally situated in this format. Both of them were. So I do want to respect that. And there are elements of this team that are really important to crafting a good top heavy team. It just fell short, I think, on those mid tiers because they didn't properly cover for type weaknesses. They didn't have specific use cases, and I think that's what really harmed this team. Even though Togekiss Garchomp was a really strong top, Gengar a good Pokemon. I think just those smaller things really make this or could have made this team look a lot different. Um, but I do think it is still not the worst team for sure. Um, but getting back to our um, our lessons from looking at these teams, you want individual Pokemon with more options. This is actually a little independent of the teams. I think it's more true of Sukaba's team than Sly's. If anything, I think this is what Sly misses on this team. Um, just because Urshifu is pretty locked into what it's doing. Um, Heatran can run a lot of moves and items, but its role is pretty homogenous from what I've seen at least. Um, so those two are pretty rigid. Tornadus is not that rigid. It can go a little more attack. It can go a little, and it can go, I mean, obviously vary into the support. So I think that is a little wider of a Pokemon. And Clefairy is pretty one-dimensional. Gastrodon has a few things it can do, um, Zarina as well, but none of these Pokemon are super multi-dimensional. Licky Licky is I guess has a lot of things it can do, but it's a mid tier on this team. So I think that is a place where this team does fall short, and I just think that having one or two of your top Pokemon, maybe it's not the Urshifu, but maybe it's the other main sweeper, that just threaten to do a bunch of different things helps you because it essentially makes your team wide without drafting wide because your individual Pokemon are wide. And I think this is helpful just because one of the inherent weaknesses of a top heavy team in my mind is that they're a little too predictable sometimes. So if you have individual Pokemon that are really hard to predict, or have multiple roles and multiple modes, then it's a little harder to know what your opponent's going to bring, even if you know the Pokemon that they're going to bring. And I think Sukaba does that a little better actually, just because Togekiss is really multidimensional, Gengar really multidimensional, and I would argue Moltres um, pretty multidimensional. Garchomp is not, Machamp isn't really, um, but I think so. The issue where this falls short for me on the multidimensional thing is that Togekiss, you know, the support on this team is not great, so Togekiss might feel pressured to support more. Pressured to click follow me for Garchomp, since Butterfree is definitely not coming, and since the damage mitigation is sort of just Moltres. Togekiss might feel pressured to click follow me, which you're essentially restricting Togekiss's role from what it could be, or yeah, you're restricting what Togekiss could do just because of the team context, which could be harmful and could stop you from getting the full value of those 20 points. So that's just something to think about as well. Um, but honestly, I think both of those teams, I think Sai's team is quite good, and I think Sukaba's team is close but not quite there. And just some of the things to highlight not to do. So Sukaba's team, a big problem is common weaknesses. You see all of these rows of common weaknesses, and they're pretty extreme. Lack of resists on a lot of types, stuff like that. Sai's team does a lot better with typing. The flying, there's a flying weakness, but you have a Heatran. You lack good electric or rock stab, good electric rock or ice stab. But that's not the worst weakness in the world. Uh, so I think that typing is pretty strong. Lackluster support, as I was talking about, could be a big issue. That's sort of the other side of striving for best. So Sly does this really well, as I said. He has great support. Sukaba, on the other hand, leaves a little to be desired. Um, you know, no icy wind, only tailwind is Butterfree, but Butterfree doesn't want to come. Togekiss has follow me, but does it always want to be clicking follow me? A lot of questions to ask yourself on, um, you know, how good is this support in practice, right? Um, I think pretty lackluster. I think that's something that hurt the team. And then mid tiers overlapping with high tiers, big no-no, in my opinion. Best example was Butterfree. Um, you just want the other Pokemon that you do have on a top-heavy team should be, you know, for whatever points you're getting them, they should be bringable in certain matchups. If it's a mid tier, maybe it's bringable in 50% of matchups only, but it's good in those 50% of matchups, and it fills something in your team that you don't already have. For a low tier, maybe it's only coming once. Maybe it has one specific matchup that it's good at, but it's coming that week, and it expands what your team can do. So I think that's a big deal with these teams as well. Um, that's about the end of the video. That's the end of the analysis. I hope it was, I hope there's something good to take away from here. Some new understanding of top heavy teams, of how to draft top heavy. I don't think I think it gets a bad reputation a lot, um, just because your team is a little more predictable. But I think with clever play and clever prep, and frankly, clever team construction when you're drafting, I think you can really make a top-heavy team shine. I think, as I said in the first video, top-heavy versus wide threat bubble, neither is inherently stronger than the other. We just have our preferences. And I think it's very interesting. Sukaba has sort of moved on from top heavy a little, but Sly still sticks pretty top heavy. So it's interesting to see how coaches develop over time. Um, and yeah, I hope this was good. I have a little teaser for the next video. Um, leave, leave in the comments below, what do you think the next video is based off this little teaser? Um, but this is going to be end of the video. Thanks for sticking around. Very happy to make these videos. Let me know how it was.